Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video I'd like to talk to you about distant education. Why? Well, because COVID-19, the global pandemic, forced educational institutions and with that teachers to move from physical teaching to digital distant teaching. And sadly, this did not go as easy as we hoped for. It was a much more rocky road than we thought. It was much more difficult, lots of minuses attached, and I don't think that the level of quality was the level that we hoped for. The transition was not really a success, partial at best, and this was mainly the case because a lot of institutions, and with that a lot of teachers, simply were not well equipped, were not sufficiently able to teach in a distant fashion. And this is a major bummer because distant teaching can have so many benefits to general teaching, to general education. It is not something that you should just be doing when you're forced to do so, not just in the face of a pandemic, but something that you should embrace in general simply because it can have lots of pluses to it. But because many educational institutions, many teachers did not think about it, did not do the necessary investments, did not take the necessary trainings, did not sufficiently think about it, of course, the distant education, and with that the digital transition of schools and teachers was not as successful as was hoped for. And there's a general problem, a general concern that actually underlies all of this, which is that education is an industry, is a sector that does not change as swiftly as it should and as we perhaps should hope for. We, especially in business schools, teach being entrepreneurial, we teach change, we teach reform, but we don't practice that much what we preach in terms of applying all of these concepts to the school itself. Education is by definition an industry sector where we don't experiment a lot, we don't innovate a lot, and it seemingly has a good reason at the base of all of this, which is that we want to teach in a good way with a high level, and we want, because of this, to use best practices, ways of teaching that have been proven to be effective and good. But the downside of all of this is, of course, that we become risk averse and that we don't experiment, especially with things that develop as swiftly as technologies and digital platforms. And this has sadly hit us quite firmly in the face in this global pandemic period. We not sufficiently being able to teach online with the quality that we aspire to reach. So, if you take all of this, actually teachers, and with that their institutions are partly guilty and partly not. They are guilty because, it's 2020. You should be able to teach in a good way online, and you should be able to master it because you should have not been thinking about it during the pandemic, but many years before that, and you should have been following developments, technological evolvements, and so on. You should have been ready, you should have been thinking about it, and now was just another year of online teaching if you did this well already in the past. Partly not guilty. Why? Well, because it's a pandemic, and the pandemic actually evolved quite quickly, and those that were not ready because they simply did not choose to teach online, of course, were caught quite by surprise. I mean, you can't force anyone to teach online in a situation in which they don't have to. Yes, distant teaching, online teaching can definitely enhance the level of educational quality if done well, but that doesn't mean that if you don't teach online that you can't have a high level of education. And lots of institutions actually didn't teach online but still had good level of quality, and these schools, because of simply their choice of not wanting to teach online, still were caught by surprise. And one might say that they're actually not that guilty because they were just doing their job very well and would have been doing that also if the pandemic would not have been around. Now, at the base, at the essence of this video is simply also to convey to you and to everyone else that might be interested in this video and in online teaching that distant teaching can have so many benefits to general teaching. Yes, it can also replace it when it has to. For example, because of locational difficulties, people might be far away, right? Certain modules, however, might not need physical proximity because certain modules might be more appealing to just interaction over the internet, or just simply watching a clip that's online. It might be much shorter, much more simple simple and much more something of digesting rather than really mastering it, and in that way, interacting, engaging with it, and being able to skillfully use it. Then again, also with, things that normally you would prefer physical teaching for, which is, being able to absorb something, being able to master it, being able to apply something. Even for these types of concepts, think about it. You don't always have to explain everything in class. What you're doing physically with close proximity to students should be something very value added, because you're there. You can show them stuff. You can discuss with them in a very high level. You don't want to reserve that time for things that are very simple, for things that are just one-way interaction, for things that you perhaps could record and put on the internet. In that way, online teaching, distant teaching really becomes a complement. It really becomes something that you can get synergies with. You can basically, put the burden at the online platform for things that would normally just be time consuming. You just record them once and then, benefit from the scaling of online systems, and you just put it all over there, let students watch stuff over there, think about it, work with it, and then when they come to class, you can really dive into very specific, very value-adding, very educational examples, cases, simulations, and so on. And you can do that together, and then you can basically have the benefit of both physical and distant teaching. Now, one thing that we have to, of course, think about is that, one of the benefits of the pandemic is that we actually start to think about how online teaching and physical teaching can go hand in hand, what online teaching is good for and what its downsides are. One of the best things that the pandemic brought us in this regard is us thinking about online and digital teaching, and perhaps enhancing, fastening the digital transition and, the online teaching quality. It would be a severe issue. It would be a severe letdown if we would not seize this opportunity to, in the future, think more and utilize better online teaching. If we just get the attitude of, this is going to fade away, the pandemic, and then we can go back to how it was, then this is really going to be a lost opportunity. So let's really think about carefully how we can make online education work. And online education starts at the very essence with understanding and with empathy. So think about it. When you're a teacher and you're teaching a student, you're there in class and you're there in front of your computer and you're thinking about, what is this student actually expecting from me, demanding from me? And this should be at the essence of how you design your class. You should be thinking about, okay, this student is there in front of the computer, perhaps has lots of distractions around him or her. This student, is going to grasp something from a screen. But so with which type of expectation? So what is really going to tip the student over from watching Netflix to following my class? In this regard, you should be thinking about, okay, how can I best teach a student something, right? And of course, this goes through application, through gamifying perhaps your class, thinking about, for example, simulations, thinking about actual cases, exciting the student, bringing things to the student's attention that are really going to make the student long for your class and be interested in what's going to come in the coming weeks as you're going to build on your cases and as you're going to bring even more new elements to your class. You should, in this regard, also be thinking about how can I make the student live the class environment? So how can I have the student experience something that's not very different from how it was back in the days when the student was sitting in class? Not only in the pandemic situation, but also for modules for which the students can simply follow your class from home. And in this regard, you should, of course, think about interactivity, you should think about communication, you should think about low boundaries of asking, of talking to others, right? You should think about a cozy, nice environment where people can make jokes, where people can, talk and see each other, where people can interact in such a way that it really gives people the feeling that they're in class. And in this regard, all is about student-based design. Bring the student to the center of your class and think about what type of person is a student. Of course, students are very different from each other, but if you think about what the common denominator is, then you should really quickly understand that students, when there's a lot of communication, when there's a lot of interactivity, when there's lots of application with interesting cases and actual cases, when there's not that much distance between the teacher and the student, but also between students among each other. And if you can also ensure that the student does not feel lost simply because the student is missing interaction, is missing visuals, is missing the class environment, if you can make sure that all of this is in place, then the class environment does not have the online environment does not have to be really different than the class environment. And that is actually also what I try to do in my class in this difficult period. I made Microsoft Teams the center of my class. I made sure that everyone would talk to everyone, and that I would also be there in the middle of those talks. I made sure that there were small groups. I fostered interactivity, made sure that cameras were open so that people would actually see each other, and there would be some warmth that you normally miss, of course, with online teaching. I made sure that cases were actual, that jokes were in place, and that students really would feel kind of at home, or at least at school, even with distant teaching. I made my exams become oral exams, and this way I took away some of the stress of students having to record themselves with all sorts of cameras, and with this strange feeling that comes when the teacher suspects that the student is cheating. Of course, when there's an oral exam, when you're just talking and discussing with the student, then a lot of these concerns, of course, are being taken away. Through all of this, I tried to make sure that online teaching actually did not become a lost semester and did not become something like a drag, but that it really become value adding. I think I kind of succeeded in that to some extent. Of course, in explaining all of this and thinking about all of this, make sure that you take your class size into account. Bigger classes are much more difficult to apply all of this into. At the same time, you can make big classes, of course, smaller, right? You can make sure that you have smaller groups within a big class. It might take a bit more of your time, but it will difficultly increase, of course, the quality of your class. Also, think about oral exams as, places where you can have multiple students at the same time. Increasing the amount of students at oral exams will, of course, make it easier to even have oral exams with bigger classes. Of course, you can do the same things, you can do different things, but at the center of all of it should be communication, interactivity, proximity, like close proximity particularly so, giving students a cozy feeling and having recent or at least interesting, catchy application through simulations, through cases, through whatever, something that is close to the student's heart and will actually make the student be interested in what you are doing. In general, the pandemic has shown us that online teaching is something that we should be mastering, be it for a situation in need, be it for getting synergies through the combination of online and physical teaching. In this regard, of course, there's also an important role for the student. The student should make sure that the student is oftentimes asking what the teacher is doing, whether a teacher can, of course, give explanations, clarifications, particularly so because it might be more difficult to understand something when you're at home and when the teacher is at the other side of the screen. Important, of course, also that the student make sure there's a lot of feedback to the teacher, because teachers are, of course, also going through a very difficult time, not just students, right? So the teacher is trying to do a lot of things in a short time because the pandemic, of course, struck us all by lightning. And this means that through the feedback and through the communication that also comes from the student towards the teacher can make sure that students have a better experience. So don't be afraid to talk and to interact with your teacher in enhancing the level of your class. Of course, the teacher is very knowledgeable on the topic, but might not be so in how to deliver the knowledge. And I think teacher-student interaction at this point is very, very important. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe buttons. I wish you all the best in the world and hope to see you again in future videos. Take care.